Okay, everybody. Welcome to the Skillist podcast. Matt Corradino, Caribbean Earth Skills.
Brad Salon from the Roots School.
I don't even recognize him without his freaking scarf.
Yeah.
Your scarf? Where's your cold weather stuff?
Sweating in paradise.
You know, people think you can only withstand the cold, but you know, I may be weak in the cold, but I'm strong in the sun. Not in the sun, actually. My pale skin doesn't like that. So this week, we were planning on talking about some of the differences in survival in the different ecological zones.
Yeah, I thought since we were here in the tropics I'm here in the tropics for...
For what, I'm not here too?
Yeah. Well, you're always here, or mostly here. That we would talk about the differences, or like even acclimatization, or kind of things that people might overlook that's a part of tropical survival. I just remember coming down here the first time with Sarah, and how the idea of the tropics in your mind is like, oh, it's going to be paradise. And then the reality of it is that parts of it are paradise, but then there's a very real learning curve to being successful, just like having fun outside here.
Yeah, nowhere has everything.
Right.
And I think that is like it's like the vacation mentality.
Right.
You know, I'm going to a beautiful tropical island. There's going to be as much food as I want and as much water, and it's going to be perfectly comfortable, and, you know, I won't even need the fire because it's going to be too warm for a fire anyway. So, and it's kind of like the same thing as people who move here. You know, you come on vacation, it's the most amazing, then you move, and then you're like, oh, this sucks, and that sucks, and this sucks. And the same is definitely true of survival. And I also think something that people overlook a lot is you think that there's lessons that aren't going to be applicable. But really, everything you learn in the tropics, there's an application to it in the temperate zone. And whatever you learn in the temperate zone, there's an application to the tropics. You just gotta find the correlate, find the thing that's the most like it.
What's an example of that sticks out to you?
I was thinking birch bark, weaving birch bark. Your correlate would be like the leaf sheath of the royal palm.
Right.
Right. There's not as many barks, but you're going to find it in that leaf sheath, or I guess another correlate like spearing. Honestly, it's like, yeah, spearing fish. Most people think of spearing fish here, and they think of like just snorkeling, but the amount of energy burn that's involved in being in the water, it might not be cold,
right?
But there's a difference between well-fed, the energy burn, and not quite so well-fed and the energy burn. So yeah, those are just a few. But I found that there's that everything that I learn here, I just have to adjust it a little bit in the temperate zone, and vice versa. Things that I've learned in the temperate zone, I just got to adjust it. Adjusting the materials, adjusting the application to it. Like another example would be like the same thing with the spear and the fish spear. I use that fish spear to catch iguanas as well, because same thing. It's got the barbs on it to catch the fish. I can always use that barb the same way to catch an iguana.
Right.
So just thinking outside the box a little bit with what you have, and not being quite so specific. One of the biggest things about learning these skills is you tend to learn them in a very specific context, right? This group of people did this to catch this, and you think about it as like that's only for catching this in this type of area, and then you do a little research on a different place that you're going, and you're going to find something that's very similar to it, but just a slightly different application. And even hypothermia is possible here.
Right.
You get enough rainy days in a row, and it can really suck.
Right.
I can't say I haven't personally been close. I've definitely been cold enough to be shivering pretty uncontrollably for a good 20 minutes or so. Which 20 minutes is usually enough to kill you, but were it to continue to be rainy and uncomfortable in those conditions, you can still get hypothermic. It's just the chances of getting deadly hypothermic and dying from hypothermia are maybe small, but putting yourself in a caloric deficit and in just like an ability deficit by being mildly hypothermic somewhere tropical, like that can ruin quite a few days in a row.
Yeah. I always think about like a funny correlation between distance from the equator and likelihood of dying from hypothermia versus like dying from something poisonous. I feel like as you go towards the equator, there's more poisonous things, but less chance of dying of hypothermia.
Yeah, well, and something you brought up when we were talking about this earlier is water.
Right.
Water can be so freaking difficult here. I mean, sure, a bigger island, you know, you might have, it's going to catch more water, generally speaking, but there's large areas of big islands that still don't have hardly any water. Like I think of like the south shore of Borican of Puerto Rico. It's very similar to here. You might have some running streams, but just what you're talking about, like, well, not poison, but bacteria, right? Like that water's not nearly as safe in that running stream as it is in Vermont in that running stream.
Right.
I mean, sure, cow crap is like a different sort of beast, but we got cows here too, you know, so you still have to watch out for some of those things. And to me, that's like the number one challenge here. When I think about all the times that I've done survival trips in the Pine Barrens, in the Pacific Northwest, in like the Mid-Eastern states or Mid-Atlantic states, Middle Eastern states. Speaking of water issues, Mid-Atlantic states. I think about how easy water is. I mean, especially the Pine Barrens. It's like find a swamp and you're good. You know, that was definitely something that took a while to remember once I left living there all the time. It was like, oh, I got to be ready to filter my water. I got to be able to find it somewhere. That's a huge challenge. It's like an enormous challenge. I don't think of Vermont as a place where I'm struggling to find water. I could be wrong about that.
No, it's so easy. I mean, even finding springs that you don't need to purify is pretty easy. Like most hills, if you go to where the hill starts to plane out and flatten, the water wants to run like this through the ground. And so if you find a steep hill that comes in like, at a pretty quick angle to flat, the water will be traveling like this and it will bust out of the ground at like the lower part of that L. And that's pretty reliable. And yeah, spring identification's pretty easy there.
It's crazy because here it's like that this doesn't exist. It's really like, and a lot of tropical places, because there's so much porous limestone, you have like huge rivers that just sink and go away, or like random places. And you're talking about that, like the shape of the landscape and how the water flows through there. But here it's like, I never find springs lower down. I find springs here higher up, places where maybe that's happening on some level that I'm just not aware of because I'm not going higher up than that spot. But it's definitely, it's harder to, there's not a rule that you can follow that generally ends up being true. I find this, you just got to keep searching and searching until you find it. And especially dry times, like right now we're just entering the dry time, and ooh, man, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
It is a huge challenge.
Yeah, you were saying it even affects your psyche. And you were talking about how it's like a little depressing when everything goes brown. And it makes me think about stick season for us, like in November, before the snow comes and the days are just getting shorter and shorter and the leaves fall off the trees. And there's definitely like a part of you that has to be like, okay, like switch your mindset to how is this going to be, like what am I going to take advantage of here?
This too,
especially the hunting season ends and the snow hasn't really fallen yet. And you're just like, what am I doing here? That's why we usually try and leave in November.
We're going to the Caribbean.
Yeah, end of November is just like, all right, get me out of here before the Christmas mayhem starts on the mainland, and like, yeah, it's depressing.
It's definitely something that I never really thought of, but I find this a lot at this time of year too. It's funny because we happen to do our survival trips around this time of year, and it's like just as it's starting to get dry, and just as it's starting to get a little bit hotter, and there's something like miserable to your core about cold. But then there's something like really, really challenging to your psyche about constant heat.
Yeah.
Like sitting by the fire, putting on a warm set of clothes, you can kind of reach this point where it's like, it's nice to have the cold, right? You get that crispness, that like vigorousness, but it's like the opposite tends to not be true. You're kind of like, you're trying to cool down, but you only want this level of cool down. Like for me, it's tough because I can get in the water and I'm kind of good, but like I get cold really freaking quickly in the water here, which is funny because when I'm in the States teaching and the water is far colder, it's like there's a mental preparation that's going into it, and I can withstand that cold much easier because I think it's because my core temperature is dropping I'm coming out at summertime. Now I'm super comfortable.
Right.
Whereas here, I'm not dropping my core temperature, but so much. Like I'm
Right.
dropping it a little bit, but then it's like instantly back way up. You know, I'm not really, I might be dropping it a degree or two, but I'm not dropping it like, 2 or 3 degrees. I don't know what that number is.
Right. Well, I think there's something to that, like the heat exhaustion or like the way the sun can take it out of you here. It's something, watching even my 1-year-old in the last week and a half just get so much more cooked and be so much more tired so much more easily, or my 4-year-old and having her, like when she loses her shit, it's mostly because she's not getting enough water or because she's overheating because her body's just not used to it. And with us, even like tricking her into drinking water in every way that we can think of, she's just like, her body's struggling to keep up. And whereas Sarah and I can just like notice it in ourselves and be like, oh, I need to take a second. She's just like, go, 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 have fun, have fun, have fun.
Well, that's one of the things I was just thinking about as you were saying that. It's like, with the cold, it's like, you're kind of reaching this point where like, oh shit, I got to warm back up. Like this is getting super uncomfortable.
Right.
Where, there's like heat stress, heat stroke, like those like definable, but I think of it as like heat fatigue. You're not there. You're not like at a dangerous level, but you're just kind of lethargic.
Right.
And you don't want to do anything.
And
moving
then
your body doesn't help.
Adding that to a calorie deficit, which is also another thing we all notice here, is that it's like harder to eat when it's hot. You're not like when you're cold in Vermont, it's like, give me it all. Give me all the food. Like it's easy to get the calories in or there. But here, like nobody wants to eat until it's dark.
I thought about that
other than
one
fruit.
time, like on the survival trip, like, is it that people aren't eating because they're too hot? But I just think it's spices. People
Right.
miss spices. Hey, you want some more of this goat? No, I'm actually full. Like, bullshit, you're not full. You
Yeah.
just want mustard. That's all it is. Somebody said that to me one time.
I just want
You
salt.
think is there something that's kind of like mustard? Because so I really like mustard with my meat,
Oh, my God.
Something. What do
Hunger.
we do for flavors?
Hunger's the best spice.
Yep, but you just got to get hungrier. Then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Of course, then you're like, hey, anybody want mangoes? Like, bing! I'm hungry. I can eat 20 of them.
Oh my God.
Which is great when you get that out of season mango harvests. Oh man, I've seen people like immediately turn around. I'm like, you didn't eat any of that. You didn't eat any of it. Oh, I'm full. I thought you were full. That's not your mango.
I'm good on snails. Is that a mango?
I'm totally full. Bananas. I wonder, like, is it? I haven't looked into the science of it. Does your body want that quick sugar? Like, is that better to your body in those hot conditions? Because it's easier to digest and you're like burning less calories to digest. Because, digestion will
Heats
raise your
you
body
up.
heat.
Yeah, totally.
You don't notice it so much until you pig out really hard somewhere, in the temperate zone. And I've had that where like we were doing this canoe trip and I could eat like 3 times the amount of what I normally eat, which is a lot. And I did one night, and I was just sweating so hard, and it wasn't that hot.
Right.
And Carmen was like, dude, what is going on? I was like, I think it's that enormous meal that I just ate right before bed.
Yeah.
So maybe that's it. Like you really crave those sugars because you get the quick, easy burst, and your body doesn't have to break it down to
Right.
get to those to get to that quick energy burst. We don't have as many fruits where we go on. People again, you think the tropics, it's like fruit everywhere. But it's not really that the case.
Right.
Summertime, mango season, yes, fruits everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But other times a year, it's not really like that. I can't think of anywhere in the world I've been where, unless, sure, on somebody's farm, here, yeah, great, because we have all this variety of fruit, but you're not finding that many fruits in the bush.
Well, so there's a couple things. Like one, you were talking about how like it's easy to get detail oriented, but I feel like the devil is in the details. Like that's where I see a lot of the skills succeed or fail, is that like apply all principles totally works, and maybe if you know the details of both, but I really find myself, even with like bow drill woods, having to know, okay, this one likes light pressure, lots of speed, short duration. This one likes medium pressure, medium speed, long duration. So like with water down here, this crossed my mind. Is it mythological that you can get enough water from coconuts?
No, I do not think you can get enough water from coconut.
Yeah, I don't either.
You could, But you need a grove.
Yeah, you'd be all day just opening coconuts.
Yeah, so some trees, you'll see a tree that's like loaded with like, let's say 50 coconuts per clump. But the lower down clumps are more mature, and you can't rely on those because of the amount of oil.
Right.
And then you have the younger ones, and when they're really young, it's fine for a little bit, but that's really hard on your liver. They're really medicinal, honestly. And then you have that perfect in the middle, and you can drink those a lot, but then now you're getting sugars. And so now your body has to break down those sugars. So now you need water, right? So that cup of water is a little bit more hydrating than that cup of, okay, I shouldn't say that. So it still is hydrating, but how many are you really getting?
Right.
You might get it for that day. Sure, maybe Southeast Asia or places where coconuts are...
And do you have a tool to open it, or are you opening them primitively?
Well, now you got to climb the tree
right.
to get to them. Yeah, like you're saying, like you got to open them. Like I can crack them open, sure, but now I got to catch all that water. And most coconuts, you might find a tree that you get 1.5 to 2 cups.
Right.
At most 8 to 12 ounces is pretty normal.
So then desert, not desert, but if you were marooned on an island in the tropics, like that's, if we're talking about tropical survival, I feel like that's the trope. If you were in that situation in the tropics, how are you procuring enough water to actually get by?
You're finding a spring or like creating a seep, like a coyote well where you dig a seep and then put boards in there and then allow the water to seep through the boards so it's not full of mud. But you can, sure, if you're somewhere in Southeast Asia where coconuts are native and there's massive amounts of them, you could do that, but you're going to get that limit pretty quickly. Or you're going to need to drink probably 15 to 20 a day, just amount of water. And in 2 days, 3 days, you're not going to be able to get any from that coconut. Now, you can't go back to that coconut for a month.
Right.
Because it takes 3 months. So in that first month, they're medicinal. In that second month, they're perfect. In that third month, there's too much fat in it.
Right.
So that's what you would use before you're finding your spring.
And then what about honestly, water? Yeah, I was going to say catchment of rain.
You're doing catchment, and that can be easy. There's lots of large leaves.
Right.
That's like, the plants are made like that so that they can, they're really, a lot of times they're trying to shed the water and get rid of it. But there's lots of large leaves, and we've done that with students before. Like, really, the students were the ones who were excited about learning about it, and just set up a little roof just for catching water. And we were able to catch a decent amount. But yeah, you really have to find a source. It's really essential.
Yeah.
And then we've tried distilling.
Would you base your camp around that?
Oh yeah. Oh,
yeah, definitely. Like in Vermont, I'm like, yeah, water, but also.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's like, no, water.
Period. That's it.
Okay,
that's
cool.
The beginning and the end. And another thing people think is like they want to be on the beach, but really the beach is like, say, one of the worst spots long-term survival-wise.
Right.
Dry season, a lot of places, sure, you'll be okay, but then you have sun exposure. And then you don't think about this, like maybe you do, if you're not like a beach person. Just that like natural, and I'm a surfer, so I love the waves, but there's like a natural stress that comes with that constantly all the time. And even like it's a whole day surfing, I'm super happy, and then I go away from the ocean, and my body is just like,
right.
From not hearing that sound all the time.
Right.
Even though I love it, I'll friggin' be at the beach all day, every day if there's waves, but my body is telling me something a little bit different. I think that's part of the allure of surfing, is like finding that line in this stressful situation and utilizing that and like harnessing that stress. Because anybody else is like, I'm staying away from there. Surfers are like, I'm going there.
Right.
Everybody else is like, no, that's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that sense when I'm snowboarding, where you're like 40-mile-an-hour wind and it's -10, and you're like, yeah, powder. Like, bring it on, nature.
Yeah, but you get lost.
Right, you're going to die in an hour.
Shit. Yeah, at least you have you might not have a couple hours. Another huge thing, the ocean, like, it's like, yes, this amazing source of food. It's going to cool you down in that tropical place. Plus, people love the beach.
Right.
But people don't tend to think of lifeguards until they're drowning. The guy that tells me I can't go over there, oh, fuck those guys. And then you're drowning. Like, a big thing that we always are telling students here, and it's so against people's nature, is like, they're in the water, they're fishing, everything's great, and I tell them every time you tell them, like, go to deep water, go to deep water. But people don't want to do it. They want to be on the shore when they get in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Right? They go a little bit too shallow. Now a wave comes. Now they're like on the rocks and they're freaking out and they're standing up and you're standing up in like knee-deep water and now the wave is smashing you onto the rocks.
Right. You're safer in the deep
water.
Go
into the deep water, right? And it's so against our nature in that situation. Sure, if it's just sand, then whatever, go into the shallows. But even there, if it's rough surf and you're in a shallow spot, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You know, you need that deeper water. And again, it's like, oh, the beach, it's so great, so alluring, it's so healing, so relaxing. And that's all great until you breathe in just the littlest amount of water. And now you're choking. And now you're freaking out.
Right.
And, you know, you could die very quickly. That's like the hypothermia correlate for us, I think.
Right.
Is
drowning.
Yeah, everything was great. And I was spearing fish. And then all of a sudden I was dead. Right. You know, and it happens. It really happens that way.
Oh, yeah. I'll
like
never
even
forget.
Surfers, the small days, it's easy. That's when most people get hurt and die even surfing. Because it's small, it's safe, but it's shallower water.
Yeah, when I got to Hawaii, which was the first tropical place I visited, I was on Kauai and hiking the Nepali coast. And you'd get to the first big valley, Hanakapiai Beach, and there's a sign. This is the following people have died at this beach. It's like 50, 60 names. By now, that was 20 years ago.
I almost guarantee you how that happened, too. Oh, it's so hot. Woo, let's go swimming. Oh, this is so good.
Right.
Done.
Rip. Gone.
Done.
Yeah.
Right? Finished. Yeah, and that, I mean, when you're talking about rip currents, right? And then, like, that's just another thing to know is, like, spending time looking at that water, right? Not just seeing it as, oh, it's this tropical beach. It's the safest, you know, like... People look at the ocean somewhere cold and they instantly are like, it's pretty, but I'm not going in there. But the tropics, it's like, it doesn't make it safer.
Well, so how, if you were like a beginner approaching the ocean or you were approaching the ocean in a place that you didn't know, no previous knowledge of, what do you look for? Or how does a person learn that?
So every reef, so we don't have, there can be rip currents, but rip currents are usually... typically from sandy beaches, and they shift all the time because the water's coming up into the shallows and needs to escape, and then the sand gets pushed out and you get this rip current. Here the currents tend to go side shore until they turn out to sea. So when I look at the reef, I'm just looking at, okay, is the drift left or is the drift right? And the biggest thing is just like, again, there's the 3 rules, tell the people every time, but they tend to forget the rules, is like staying calm, obviously the number one, like not panicking, and then never fighting the current. You know, you never fight the current.
Yeah.
But it's nature. It's like, I'm going away from the beach, but I want to go towards the beach, so I'm just going to swim in. It's like, where's the deep water, right? Find the deep water, like go there. That's where the current is usually going to slow down. And then you have to know your area. Right? If you have 2 islands next to each other, now you have to be super careful. And now you have to watch the tides. So before I'm getting in that deep water where there's 2 islands, is it low tide or is it high tide, and which way is it going? Because that's going to tell me whether the water's going that way or whether the water's going this way. Right. One island by itself, generally speaking, again, just like as a general rule, most of the time the current is going to be just going to the next beach. Shallower over here, the water's coming out to get to deeper water and pushing around the corner into the next little reef. And the one that's really hard for people when they're in the water and they're in a little trouble is to let the waves push you in. Because again, it's like most people look at the waves and they're like, that's the dangerous spot, I'm staying away from there. But if the water is heavy, you have to let that push you in.
Right.
You're not gonna time it just right most of the time, especially since the water's coming back out to sea. You just let those waves tumble you in, and you know I get it's scary, especially when your whole life it's been, yay, we're playing at the beach, and you didn't realize it, but that lifeguard was sitting there watching you like a hawk, and you know that's like you're talking about being on Hawaii, and I immediately was like, oh man, lifeguards, like what an important thing. Is a Hawaiian lifeguards. Then you said Kauai, and I was like, oh shit, there's not as many lifeguards on Kauai as there is on
I don't remember seeing a single one.
Well, it's like, you're on the Nepali coast, you're not going to freaking post a lifeguard out in the middle of nowhere. And it's again, it's that same mentality you're talking about in the beginning. We're going to the tropics. It's so, easy on my body and so, rejuvenating. And it is. But at the same time, there's dangers that you don't usually think about.
Well, right. I guess that was the other thing that was big for us when we first came down here. Like, I remember waking up and Sarah had like a big purple mark on her head, on her temple. And it was like, I was like, what's on your face? And she was like, what? What are you talking about? And she had like rolled over on a gungalo, the millipede, and it burned a little spot where like she didn't have like the same pigmentation there for like a year.
Wow. That was long. That was a long one.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But it was just like, oh shit, like there's a different level of paying attention to like the hazards in a location like this. And what I found is you either need somebody like you, or I found a lot of luck with people who like work landscaping, who are like fucking with nature, not just someone who's like, I walk through nature occasionally.
Yeah,
these are the hazards, but someone who's like, I'm chopping nature down and this is how it reacts. Like that's the people who know like what plants to avoid, what animals or insects to avoid.
We're lucky here to not have poisonous snakes.
Right.
And yes, we have the brown recluse and we have the black widow, but we're not like crawling in scorpions and there's not tons of spiders and like I said, no poisonous snakes. And so when you think about places that have poisonous snakes, it's like the big thing that freaks people out. But to me, like if I'm in Costa Rica or Central America somewhere, I'm not afraid of that big huge snake, even if it's like somewhat poisonous. I'm afraid of that fer de lance that's this long and that can crawl up in the toe of my shoe, or even like, I'm not saying there's no danger there, but most of the time it's those little things you don't think about. Like you're talking about the gungalo. Yeah, sure. It's like, it's not going to bite you. It's not going to sting you, but you smash it and it's full of chemicals that keeps everything from eating it. And that thing will burn you. Right. I was climbing this tree one time here, just like sitting in the tree, like hanging out. And I like saw this pod of saman tree, and they're edible when they're fully ripe. And I pulled it off, and it was green. And I was just kind of like studying it, doing my whole tracker school. Ooh, and study it really up close. And I was like studying it really up close, like looking at these little designs. And I was just barely pushing on it, and it snapped. And like the water from it, the liquid went right into my eyes. I was like, oh, this is probably not good. Like climbed down out of the tree, and by the time I was out of the tree, it was burning pretty bad. And there's condos right there, right where those pink condos are, so you can't get to the beach. And I had to walk like 2 or 3 minutes. And by the time I got to the ocean, I was full blur. Like I could see shapes and colors, no detail at all. And I was just like washing my eyes out. And finally, after about 5 minutes, it kind of got back to normal vision. And then 10, 15 minutes later, I was good.
Blinded in a tree.
Edible fruit, right? When it's ripe, it's freaking edible. It's like an innocuous-looking pod. I'm studying it all up close, and then all of a sudden, in an instant, I'm like potentially blinded.
Right. Yeah, Sarah was reading like the mango juice, when you break them off, can shoot like 3 feet.
I haven't seen it shoot that far, but maybe I wasn't looking.
Right, but still, it's just like those silly things you don't really think about until
can you imagine you're doing like a, it's like a survival situation type thing, and it's mango season, so you're like, oh, this is so great, but you're getting a little bit too much of that skin, and now you got like this rash all over your face. Right. Now you can't eat any of those mangoes.
Yeah. Oh, man, or Neto got all that Christmas bush. He got covered.
My friend, we went out goat hunting, and I took this shot, and it was, let's say it was an ill-advised shot. And it was low.
Let's just
say. Just imagine it was an ill-advised shot.
Let's just for the sake of argument.
Just in case it was. I'm not saying it was, but just in case it was a bad shot. So anyway, I'm shooting, and that's how I knew it might have been ill-advised, because I was freaking shooting straight up this steep hill, and I hit her. I was like, okay, sweet. And I like let her sit for a little bit, and then I was like, okay. 5 minutes go by. I'm like, that's long enough. I go through the woods, and I had an idea where they were going. So I go up into this spot, and there's this bamboo grove, and I'm like creeping real slow through this bamboo grove, and I smell her. I'm like, oh, like that smells pretty strong of goat. But then it was like, oh, it smells like goat stomach. And it turns out the shot was way low, and I caught her in the stomach, kind of, and it kind of just passed through and never really caught the vitals. And I'm creeping up on her. She's just bedded down. And I got, I don't even know, maybe a little bit more than me to you, like another foot away. but there was this branch right between us. So I had to like hop over the branch, and I'm like getting ready, and I have the knife out, and it's like, okay, planning in my head. I'm going to hop over this bush. I'm going to hop over the bush. I'm going to try to grab her horn if she runs away. Otherwise, I'm just trying to straddle her and cut her throat. And as I'm sitting there planning, a goat in the distance calls, and she just gets up and starts, and I jump and start running, and now she's gone and like runs right into this super steep hillside, covered in Christmas bush. My friend comes up, and he's like, we're talking about it, and we can't find her, and she's not making noise, and it's been an hour or so, and he's like, no, come on, let's get her. And he had been here the year before, and we had talked about Christmas bush, but I forgot to remind him about it, and he's okay, I'll go here, and you go there. Okay, cool. All right, and we'll meet in this spot. So we go, and we would spook her like 10, 15 feet, but then you'd need a new way to get towards her because, you were crawling. And then we're from the other side, and then this goes on for an hour, and he's like, all right, well, we're going to do it again, but like this time you're going through that spiky shit. And I was like, oh yeah, just as a reminder, right? That's like the poison ash. It's in the poison ivy family. I crawled through the same thicket just as many times. Eventually what happened is she ran way further than she had, and I was just like, let me take one longer walk than I expect her to be on. And I was going, and I heard her call, and I was creeping down, and she was like 10 feet down. And I was like, all right, there's nothing else really I can do. I just got to like try to jump on her back. And so I ran down this insanely steep hillside that's right over this cliff. And I ran down, and then I slid and put my foot on her back. And she jumped up and almost sent us both over the cliff.
Oh.
So I grabbed the trees, and I just let her go. And the way she ran, I was like, I bet I can catch her. And I'm running, and then my shoe breaks. And I'm like hobbling after her. And finally she ran down to a spot where there was kind of a cliff next to her, and she didn't want to get in the water, and I caught up to her, and like, hey, thank you, sorry about this, cut her throat. She bled out in the water. We had to drag her through these tide pools, because I wasn't going to take her back up the cliff and back through all that shit. Anyway, we end up dragging her through all these tide pools. We clean her, we gut her, we skin her, we bring her home, like, everybody's happy, right? We're cooking up the meat, and then my friend looks, and he's got this little spot on his arm. And then the next morning he wakes up, and he is just coated in poison ivy rash. All over here, all over there, everywhere, just coated. It looked horrible. It was like open and weeping. And I was like, hey, I got some. It was like a quarter-sized piece on my arm. Oh, see, I'm suffering with you, bro. Oh,
terrible.
Barely.
Yeah.
But she tasted good.
Yeah.
Tasty goat. Note to people watching: don't shoot when it's like this.
Yeah.
Right? If it's like this, sure, but like that, just probably don't shoot.
And Christmas bush.
Yeah, and definitely.
And
Christmas
I mean,
bush.
learn your hazards. Like I think, if
first.
you're gonna learn anything with a tropical or just any new environment, that would be my number one thing. If I could only be briefed on one type of like nature set, it would be what here will give me rash. Or
what do you think by you? What's the hazard?
I mean, I would want to know, or I make sure people know about poison ivy. We don't have tons of it in Vermont, and we have more than 20 years. When I first went there was none. But poison ivy and then ticks are starting to move up there.
So don't miss
We
that.
mostly have dog ticks, which are just annoying. And then, yeah. But
You've noticed a big uptick?
Oh, yeah. Well, and people moving around with their dogs, people and their fur babies. Have
the dog with the bandana?
It's always the fucking bandana, dude.
I don't feel good putting him on a collar and a leash.
Yeah.
She's gonna tie this bandana.
He's just gonna bite your kid a little.
I swear he's being playful.
Yeah.
See how he didn't hold on? You let go after
Just a little nip.
It's okay. He's barking, but he really cares about you. That's why I named him Skippy, so you would know. He's cool.
Yeah, so, but the ticks are moving north, and then,
What's the season on the ticks? Is it like winter? You're good.
Oh yeah, winter's fine. You're really.
But I mean, on a warm day in winter.
No, there's no ticks.
They're not gonna like reanimate.
No, it's spring. Okay. It's spring is like when they're bad, and then we don't see any ticks until fall again, and then there's a brief season in the fall. But like when I'm hunting,
what's happening in the summer?
There's mosquitoes. It's
okay.
like it's.
But no, where are the ticks going?
I don't know. I don't care. We see a lot of them in the spring, and then it just stops, and for whatever reason, there's like maybe you'll see a little. Dispersed. Yeah, exactly. But it's like tick season for us is like June. It's like black flies and ticks, and then mosquitoes through the summer, and then there's a brief season of ticks again in the fall, and then it's just don't freeze to death.
Yep.
And other than that, like you might, if you're lucky, find a brown recluse, but they're like on the map, but I never see them.
I mean, I was thinking to like maybe is cold water, cold rushing stream a hazard there, but that's approach most of the time.
Yeah, and it's obvious either the river is in flood stage, and people do die in Vermont that way. You know, like every spring.
Let me go and take a dip real quick.
Yeah, or there's just like cliffs into pools that people jump into, and then certain days that same spot or that same spot that you would normally jump into sucks you down and holds you.
Because the water's twice as powerful.
Right, and you just right, exactly, or just rainy.
I know in the Pine Barrens you have these quarries, and it looks like this amazing Mediterranean water.
Yeah.
And you jump off of the well, it's not a cliff, like steep.
Yeah,
sand
the
dune.
cuts. Yeah.
But then the water gets colder as you go down, and so you jump from a height, and people drown. Like there was way more drownings a year than I realized until I was reading about this. But there's usually 4 to 5 drownings a year for people jumping in water, and then they break that thermocline to get where it's really cold, and then their body just seizes up. Drown.
Yeah.
Does that happen? Because I know there's quarries by you, right?
Yeah, people do a lot of quarry jumping. I've never heard of that. People smash their feet on, break their legs and shit on stuff that's like old derricks that are down in there.
Steel thing you did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yikes.
But then, really in New England, because I've been researching a lot, trying to figure out. There's okay, people are scared of bears, but what actually kills people in the woods? Hypothermia.
Other people.
Yeah, other than getting shot by a hunter, right? Which isn't that many. It's like 1 a year. Falling off of cliffs in the whites. Like a few people a year are
just too close to the cliff?
Yeah, and just bad footing, and then or people get mildly hypothermic and then stumble off of some shit. They're
playing with their dog with the bandana. They got too vigorous.
Well, there's definitely been some selfie stories where people were backing up to a cliff.
Closer.
Yeah,
let me get closer.
That's such a brutal way to go.
I wonder if there's actually out there some pictures of people
It's so dark.
It's really macabre.
It's so dark, but also really funny. Yeah, totally.
Falling off the cliff face? Is this?
Yeah, the final selfie. But yeah, so I mean, other than that though, it's it's all hypothermia.
I wonder if it's the bears wake up. The ticks are just on the bear. Is that your where the hell are the ticks going?
Well, I mean they hibernate in the dirt or in the subnivean layer between the ground and the leaves. That's where.
Did you just say subnivean layer?
Subnivean.
What is that?
It's the layer between the leaves and the dirt.
Such a bigger nature nerd. Wait, the layer between the leaves and dirt?
Yeah, it's
what is that?
It's the subnivean layer. I don't know the fuck. It's just what it's called.
What are those things?
That's where shrews live.
Kind of like this goo
that
the leaves turn into. The subnivean layer.
Whatever. What were you saying to me about those jellyfish? You were like, those other jellyfish are, and then black, blah, black, blah, black.
Is the subnivean layer the layer between the bandana and the dog's fur? That's see, in the Pine Barrens, it's very easy to know the time. Where do the ticks go? They go on to students. Ticks are everywhere. Then you run a couple classes.
They're gone. Yeah, clear them out.
And they're back.
That's hilarious.
Oh, that is something I do not miss, is the ticks.
Yeah.
I mean, we do have ticks. It's crazy. You pick up a roadkill deer here, and they're just coated in ticks.
Huh.
I have had, in 13 years, I had 1 tick crawling on my body ever. And it was because I was skinning a deer.
Right.
I have a friend who had one on them once, and I seem to remember that Carmen picked the tick off of one of our kids, and that's it. It's all we've seen of ticks.
Wow.
But you get a dead deer, and they're just coated.
Yeah.
Our friend brought us a deer that seemed like it died because of ticks. It Carmen showed me a picture, and it was scary. I've never seen so many ticks on an animal. It was as much ticks as fur.
Dude, the winter tick that the moose get. The moose are dying. Tick. They're dying in Maine and New Hampshire from what they call winter tick. I think it's a different tick that is just after big ungulates, but they scratch so hard they scratch their fur off, and then they die of hypothermia.
Oh shit!
Yeah, and like I
so
found
bigger,
spots.
They're not sucking more blood.
Oh no, they're like.
Oh, they're huge.
Yeah, and I found spots where I was
bloated.
Yeah,
okay.
no, that's bloated.
So when they start, they're normal tick size.
Normal tick size, yeah. And so I found spots where I was like tracking a moose, and I'm like, okay, it's standing on 3 legs, and then I'm just seeing tufts of fur, and then I'm seeing like grapes.
Oh shit.
And I'm like, oh my god. Like this moose has winter tick.
What time of year was that?
Winter.
Oh, okay, so they're only in the winter that they're that bad, or that's only the time when they're dying, or like.
Yeah, that's as far as I know. That's when it's killing them.
But it's just a different type of tick, not a dog tick or a Lone Star or anything. Or
yeah, I'm not sure. I should research it more. But
I know it's the Midwest. They have them big fat ticks. The first time I did a road trip, my dog he like ran out for 5 minutes and he came back fat ticks. I'm like, it didn't get bloated on him in 5 freaking minutes.
Right.
Like, is that the same type of tick, or is it just like? Yeah, I wonder about that. So research. Where's our researcher out there? Tell us about the winter tick.
I'll look into it because it's crazy shit.
Yeah, we don't have the winter tick here.
Yeah.
It's funny, we were talking about seasons earlier, and I was like, we have many seasons, but winter is not one of them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the funny thing when, or it's another thing I think people forget about or miss when thinking about tropical survival is like, is it hurricane season? Is it the dry season? Is it fruit season, or what fruits are in season, or just that local knowledge, that precision of detail knowledge really is so key towards making it here.
Oh yeah.
Like the folks that come down to do the survival trip here, which you have one in like 2 weeks, their ability to do it is so much based on y'all's experience.
Oh yeah, they'd be hurting bad.
Right.
If it wasn't for our knowledge. It's been okay, hold on. Yeah, it's been cool to see the evolution of that class as we have gotten more knowledgeable. Like the first time we ran that class, we had spent maybe 2 months here, and we're not just like, yes, we're vacationing, but it's like part of what we do.
Right.
So at that point, we knew a fair bit more than most people know about survival, just about nature here, because it's something that we studied heavily. But to see the evolution through the years, where it was like those first years we were eating better than I had on any survival trip in the States, but by the last 3 or 4 years, we're eating really good.
Yeah. Like, so what's the big differences?
Tons of calories. Just knowing those little things, like it doesn't sound like much to get flower nectar, but when you get the nectar of 200 flowers, that's like a quick pick-me-up. Or like knowing, all right, this time of year, these are the forest fruits we can expect. So I'm not going to bother go looking for those fruits because I know I'm not going to expect it here. And then, just that knowledge, it's like, okay, so we have multiple seasons, and I think of it as like there's 2 different springs. There's like dry season spring, which is flowers, and then there's wet season spring, which is vegetation. So if it's like, dry season spring, it's like, I'm not going to bother with these 2 food sources. I'm going to bother with that food source because I know these ones aren't worth my time. And then, again, in the wet season spring, it's like, okay, now I can focus on those other food sources. So just knowing those little nuances makes a pretty huge difference, And that's basically, we have spring and fall in varying degrees, spring, fall, and summer. So I think of it as like 6 seasons, because you get like your summer, then you get your wet season, then you get your like wet season spring, then you get your dry season spring, and then all of a sudden it goes straight to fall, and then you're back in summer, but it's dry summer, like wet summer, dry summer kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then just like varying degrees, and you might get a year that's just super dry, and you just got like 1 season the whole time. But that dry season, it's like, okay, let's go for mangoes because I know there's going to be like a shower of them. Versus if it's a really wet year, I'm not going to go and bother to go looking in the mango grove to really feed us because I know there's just not going to be as many mangoes in there.
Right.
So it's a lot of nuances that you could never learn without being with somebody who's experienced with it, or just having a ton of experience yourself.
Yeah.
So, and then the ocean's always feeding you, but
also trying to kill you.
Yeah, and knowing it,
Right.
Like, sure, for most people, it's like if I'm there, then I'm like, all right, you're going to get in the water and you should go over there and you should look for these 2 or 3 types of fish. Or, you know what, don't bother with that today because of the way the water's running. You should be over there looking for lobsters, or in here looking for crabs. Or, you know, just you know, knowing what to expect from it is pretty huge.
Right.
And a lot of times it's the same all over the world. People are like, how did the natives do it? It's like, well, there was 10 times the amount of fish.
Right.
Right. There's just, same as I'm sure in Vermont. How did they do it? Well, there's 10 times the amount of land animals, you know? Like, there was way more, maybe not more deer specifically, but you had woodland buffalo, you had more bears, you had more of everything.
Yeah.
So it was an easier game. Or they didn't care about eating snails. Like, it wasn't a bother to them.
Right.
Some groups don't. Some groups are like, yeah, these snails are great. Other groups, oh, I don't want to eat that thing. Oh,
right.
Look at it, looks like a beep. So, self-bleeped.
Yeah.
I like that.
The way your kids charge you for each swear, I'm surprised you swear at all.
Well, they only charge me a penny. Yeah. It's 1 to 5 cents. So I'm just like, let me just bankroll you kids for 2 candy bars and swear 100 times. Woo!
Yeah, exactly.
It's gonna be great.
I'd be prepaying all the time.
Prepaying. Let me just pay for the whole season.
Yeah, exactly. Here's $10. I don't want to hear about this shit for a long time.
Hey, Brad, that's 5 cents.
Yeah, exactly. Take it off my tab.
Yep, exactly. You know, that's something that I like. Okay, so how much more nuanced will it be for my children?
Well, you're right.
Than it is for me. You know, how much is it going to be like things that I just didn't really realize that they're like, oh, this is the perfect time to collect this bark right now, Daddy, because you see how it looks like this? Because they're going to have that stored in their memory,
right,
from a young age. Or even they're already pretty damn good at it. Like, there's certain fruits where they're just like, you go in the woods and Eileen's just like on it. Like, where are the red stopper berries? Boom, she's out there like finding those red stopper berries. Or like the iguana hackberry. It's like she knows where those are at. They're like obscure little fruits, but she's got them all sussed out. She knows where all the patches are. And we hardly even take her there.
Right.
Or she's got an eye for that. Whereas I'm looking for animals. You know, I'm looking to like hunt stuff. But you need those supplemental food sources.
Right.
And I think that's a huge difference between the tropics versus the temperate is the large land animal. You know, like, we're kind of lucky in a way, survival trip wise, to have the goats and the deer that were brought here.
Right.
Because if it wasn't for that, it'd just only be the ocean.
Right.
You know, only be the ocean or, fruits that are in season.
Yeah.
But when you look at the historical record, what little historical record there is of pre-colonial times, God, people had it easy here.
Right.
People had it easy here. And I mean, so they were planting, right? They were agriculturalists, at least the Taino were. And so they're planting cassava and sweet potato and other, peppers and peanuts and other stuff. And a lot of those things persist. Like, there's places that are like deep in the forest and you go and it's like yams right there because somebody planted it like 150 years ago. And that's just, it's not like a corn crop where it needs to be in full sun, it needs to be reseeded. That's eventually going to go away. It's like a vine. So it's fine, as long as it wasn't all removed, like, you're going to find it. Or like I found breadfruit trees. Obviously somebody had to plant that here. Right. But it's a freaking tree, it's not going to go away. Bananas, I don't find as many here, but there's places where you can find bananas that somebody planted 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Or I found that in Central America a lot, whereas like you're in a deep forest and it's like bananas. Like, we're in the edge of a clearing, and I was like, oh, no, there's just bananas here that somebody must have planted however many hundreds of years ago.
Right. That's like the apple tree, the random forest apple in Vermont, where you're like, oh, yeah, there was a homestead here, and now there's apples.
Will those things still produce, even if they're in the deep shade of the forest, or they need to be in the sun?
It depends. Because, like, the way forests go through succession or, the way things die back, you could have some lucky forest apples that are still producing.
Now, what about hunting there? Do you find the deer go for those apple trees?
Fuck yeah, that's I mark on my map, on my hunting maps, I mark every apple tree I find.
So they're letting it ferment first, or they're just eating it fresh?
They'll eat it every way.
Okay.
They'll eat it not ripe and overripe and every way in between. Our mast is so weak. With the beech nuts being sick and not really producing, and
so all the oaks were cut down, or
it's a little cold for them. They're starting to move north, and like river valleys and ridges, you'll find them.
So historically, that wasn't a crop that was like necessarily. I mean, it was chestnut there. Is that what?
There was chestnut and beech.
Okay.
Beech was huge.
So what? The beech trees are just dying out.
Yeah, there's the Nectria fungus that allows the scale insect in, or vice versa, and then they snap off. First, they produce shells with nothing in them, and then they snap off, and the rootstock is fine, so it shoots up a ton of saplings, and nothing can grow under it, and then it's just like, Tom Wessels calls it beech hell, but it's just like beech thicket that can't produce any food.
So is that like more... So I'm remembering a few survival trips that I did in Virginia where there were there was one class where there was so many beech nuts. Of course, the students weren't eating them most of the time.
Yeah.
Oh, so small. And that's eat them
Get out of here. That's like primary.
Eat them on the 4th out of 5 days. He was finally eating them. And he's I felt really good after eating like 20 of them.
It's got everything.
But so I don't remember that being this. So is that specific to your area? Is that all up and down the East Coast now? I mean, I wasn't.
Oh, it's worse up by us.
So for whatever reason, the cold winters
doesn't.
Okay.
But like I remember at Callahan's there was that huge beech nut or beech tree, and it was producing nuts, and I was like, I've never seen so many shells actually have nuts in them.
Okay.
Because usually I'm cracking them open, and it's
Nothing.
like every 5th one, maybe every 10th one.
Yeah, it's
actually
like
has
the
a
one
fucking
time
nut
a year
in it.
where I'm usually not traveling is when they're producing.
Right.
And so there you're talking about hurricane season. It's like, man, it's burly. It's like, it's crazy owning property somewhere where you know for an absolute fact that within the next 25 to 30 years, everything's going to get smashed. Like, absolutely smashed. And I mean, like, yeah, it's nice and shady in here, but like this tree right here was like 6 times the size and fell over that way, and it just crushed that over there and almost crushed this building that's over there. And there was like, oh man, there was so little shade.
Yeah.
Like when I saw pictures, it wasn't like, so when it was at its worst, it wasn't like the pictures, in the picture it wasn't like seeing the tree falling down, it was like seeing all the shade. It's like, oh my God, look at all that amazing shade over there. Like, oh, it's burly.
Yeah, what was it, 6 years ago?
8 years ago.
8 years ago? Wow.
Oh, it was burly.
Yeah, I remember we were here like 8 months after, and it was still just like
burly.
so remarkable.
Burly.
The impact.
Well, so I think about like, what was that like for the Taino or the Kalinago or the other people who lived here.
Right.
But I found that the areas that did the worst were the areas that are full of the tantan, the Lucana, Leucocephala? I think I got it right. Anyway, those places, either the places that we had neglected to cut vines from or the places that were filled with like non-native trees did the worst, and the areas with native trees did much better.
Right.
So I'm imagining it was not as burly, but I think the main thing for them was probably like, it doesn't take as long to rebuild a primitive house as it does a modern house, waiting for materials.
Right.
You know, there's no question of I can afford it. Right. You're just going and cutting it off.
Just doing it. Yeah, just doing the work.
It was literally like, oh, what do I buy first? Am I going to buy roofing material first, or am I going to buy, something to replace the electrical first, or like, am I going to fix this first? I mean, we're lucky to have. I know how to build, and we have a mill, so like,
right.
The cost wasn't as much of an issue. But for a lot of people, it's a big issue.
Right.
Right. But then primitively, it's like you just go and get it.
Right.
There's not that same headache. I think the stressful part back then must have been like, where do you go?
Well, and also your job allows you so that you didn't have to like.
Yeah.
Go back to work. Yeah. You were just
stop and go to work. I could just fix stuff.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I think about it. Like if you were living primitively, it's like, where do you go? You just literally lay in a ditch and hope that the tree doesn't like have a branch that's spearing you.
Yeah. Well, I bet there was like, they had some knowledge of, if it's coming from this direction, we want to be here.
Oh, yeah.
And if it's coming from that direction, definitely. We want to tuck into this valley.
Well, when you see that symbol of the hurricane, right, the circle with the branches coming off of it, like that was a petroglyph for hurricane. Like they knew that, right?
Right.
They didn't see it from above. They knew the rotation from below. And I mean, I'm not that good with it, but there's definitely, I'm not that good with feeling the pressure change unless it's like the storm is right on you. But there is definitely an appreciable pressure change that you can feel in your body. That if it's a big one, and as it's on its way, and you're like, all right, it's not here yet, and I already felt that pressure change, let's all go and lay in the ditch.
Hey, kids. It's ditch time.
Oh, man, my neighbor had the best story. He was like, yeah, I parked up under this big tree, and then I was sitting under the tree, and I was like, wait, this big tree gonna fall on me. So I found some bushes, and I drive up under the bushes, and then, it was coming, and the thing was rocking, and man, Matt, it was awesome, man, you missed it. It was awesome, and I was rocking, and then I fell asleep, and I woke up, and I look around, and the damn bushes was gone, man. Man, Matt, you missed it, man. You're the man, Donald.
That's
I imagine
awesome.
how that must have been. That was really cool. Was people that I know that I'll talk with briefly. Like, you know, we're acquaintances more than friends, but like I know them, I'll always say hello to them. Hey, how you doing? Ask about their kids, whatever. It was like everybody you talked to, they wanted to sit down and talk to you. Like you wanted to talk to everybody, and like you heard everybody's story, and just hearing people's stories, and like everybody's stopping. Everybody stop. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Like, where you been? This is what it was like, man. Let me tell you my story. Like, I loved that about it. I mean, then you turn around and it's total devastation. So it sucked. You know. But I can imagine, like, at the end of that, right? You've been cowering in a ditch. You get out. Your shelter is like kind of tatters now. Your field's all bashed down.
Right.
Right. You want to find every other person in the tribe and tell the story.
Right.
Right. You want to have that circle and share that story. And like people still do that, but I can't imagine, like, you know, for us, it's like we have a concrete corner in the house. And it's like that's where you go. Like, where the hell do you go when you know it's like it's likely to blow down?
Right.
You know, I don't. That must have been intense. Because you can go where there's no trees, but like there is this thick of a trunk tree, and I thought it was this one that's right behind us. And I was like, oh, it's there. Then when I finally got through, I was like, oh, shit, this tree's still here. Where did that one come from? I was like, it had to come from at least 300 or 400 yards away.
Oh.
Or there was a piece of a roof, and I thought it was my one neighbor. And I was like, oh, hey, Psyche, this is yours? And it's like, no, that ain't mine. And we were talking about it, and we're pretty sure it came from, like, a mountain over, like a mile and a half over. Just,
right.
like, way over there. So, like, even primitively, yeah, you'd be in the field so the tree doesn't fall on you. Well, there's nothing that's keeping that branch from, like, flying over and landing on you 100 yards away.
Yeah.
It just had to be a fearsome time.
Right.
But, you know, really, when I think about the hurricane season, I don't necessarily, like, yes, the hurricane itself is a hazard, but, ooh, it's hot then. It's, like, not hot because of, the temperature's not that much different.
Just the wind does, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Especially here, because when we get that south wind, it doesn't make it into this valley. It's very still here and very hot, and that's barely, it works on your psyche, like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But, I mean, not as crazy as that random hurricane that makes it into Vermont back in the day, though.
Oh, man.
Imagine for those people, like, you're just... I mean, I'm sure they had to have stories.
Yeah. Know? Well, and I mean, yeah, you're in a longhouse that's 45 feet tall and 250 feet long.
Snow.
Yeah, exactly. Getting panels ripped off.
Yeah, well, at least that had to suck.
Yeah.
And the flooding, I'm sure.
Well, and then it's right before winter, so you better bust a move to fix shit.
I wonder, like, how you ever looked, because there was that storm that came up and hit you guys.
Sandy.
Was it Sandy? I thought there was one after Sandy that hit you guys as well.
Oh,
flooding,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Irene.
Okay. Yeah, so the waves were great from Irene.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, like, do you think there's any of that did you ever look at that afterwards and see, okay, like, when was the last time this happened? How often does it occur? Because it's still possible in Vermont.
I mean, there's still pit mound topography from some stuff that was probably like 1500s, big hurricane. And then there's, I should look into it because there were people keeping records at that point. But yeah, I don't know the big storm history of Vermont.
I would imagine that this happens. It's such a huge event. It's right before winter. Everything gets blown away. There's all this flooding. Right, he comes back. Those are like the most relaxed birds you'll ever see.
Which kind is that?
That's the bridled quail dove.
Nice.
Yeah, they're so pretty.
Yeah.
Can't really get up to turn the camera on him, but that's a pretty bird. That would have definitely been food for a lot of natives back in the day, for sure. And they like mature forests. That's not their call, Brad. Okay. He didn't like my call. You don't like that. But yeah, I imagine like there's this huge storm that rolls in. You never experienced it in your life. There's all this flooding. Your roof's all torn off. Like that story's getting told around the campfire.
Oh,
year
yeah.
After year after year.
Well, and I mean, canoe travel was such a huge part of it. Like I was talking to an archaeologist in Vermont about criteria for a dig and what they look for in terms of like, access to food, access to water, access to stone material.
Meaning, will they dig or not when you say criteria? Okay.
Right, for them to look for, artifacts. And they were like, yeah, here's this list of 12 things. If it doesn't have canoe access, we find nothing. You could have one thing on this list that is canoe access, and we find, like, limitless artifacts. Like, it was all about canoe travel in this whole region. And I think, that remodeling, like just what I've seen with our rivers through the flooding, that remodeling of the river system and having to like relearn.
Yeah, well, not just losing your canoe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
I would have to imagine that Grandpa remembered what Grandpa told him.
Right.
He said, when you see the clouds that look like this, you move the canoes to high ground.
Right, exactly.
And go lie in the ditch.
Right. Well, around here, too, canoes must have been huge.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Imagine, too, in terms of, like, if all tropical survival assumed you have a canoe that's seaworthy.
Definitely. Well, I can't say definitely because there were. I mean, this was we're in the ruins of like a colonial village,
right.
But there were villages that were away from the ocean. But anywhere where you were by the ocean, your closest community to you was always on the other side of the where was the easiest canoe access? It was either on the other side of the pass between islands or was around the corner. Even if there was a village that was actually closer by land,
right.
you would still be closer to the people who were across the water because yes, canoes were like, I don't want to say everything, but it was huge.
Right.
And the canoes were enormous.
Right.
And
Which is canoes it's cool that they go hand in hand, at least in the ocean canoes with stone tools.
Totally. Well,
because you have to be able to make them.
There was no birch bark,
right?
I'm sure there was some bark of some trees that you would use, but things break down so quickly here.
Right.
Nobody was making wooden canoes in central Vermont back in the. I mean, maybe yes.
You were there were dugouts, but yeah.
But if you had access, you were making a birch bark canoe because you could drag it.
Or even I've heard elm bark was that they would make like quickie canoes to cross the Connecticut, where they'd skin an elm tree and fold the ends and then throw a quickie gunnel in it.
But they didn't make them as longer term canoes because it was too heavy or because the bark is cracky or what was the deal?
I bet it was probably too heavy because it's totally, I bet like portaging an elm bark canoe would suck.
Yeah,
compared to a birch bark. Yeah.
Well, and I can imagine like, okay, so even if you did have that bark canoe, you probably do not want that thing in the ocean anymore than you absolutely have to.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, if you have to. Whereas, at least in that wooden canoe, whatever happens to it, even if it breaks into 5 pieces, you can float on those pieces because they're wood. And they didn't make small canoes. Like, there were small canoes, but they were making like 100-person canoes.
Right.
Because, I mean, just imagine the ocean voyages here. And I mean, this wasn't like the type of maritime tradition like they have in Polynesia, where people were traveling far, far distances.
Right, 500 miles.
But even just to like going to Puerto Rico, people would do that 90 miles. Do you want to get in a canoe and paddle 90 miles?
No, that's no joke,
probably not
man.
Without a support boat.
Right.
Better to have 100 people in that canoe than just 2.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes tons of sense. Paddling shifts and.
So and I wonder. I'm sure there's some archaeologist out here who's done some studies on the same types of thing that you're talking about, like how worthwhile is it to dig in here? What was the getting into this beach like?
Right.
If it was hard to get in, maybe there's a village there, but it's probably not worth our time. Is it easy to get in? Is there a fringing reef with easy passes to come in and out? that's the place you want to search.
Right.
You know, because it would have been huge. It's interesting to think because when you read a lot of at least for the Taino, like I was saying the other day, like it wasn't fishing culture. It was like crabs and snails and other, but it was all trade. Like a lot of that, the reason why the canoe access was so important was for trade.
Right.
You knew those guys over there because you went over there to trade, and they knew those guys around the corner because they traded, these guys have beads and these guys have stones and these guys have lots of extra cassava, like it was all about the trade network for them. And then when the Kalinago came through, then the fishing started to really come into play more because that was more of a fishing culture.
Right.
But, interesting to think about how that would have come about,
Right. I bet technology's moved around by canoe a lot too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. It's interesting to think about, so archaeologists will look at pottery styles and use pottery style as the way to say, well, these people were here and those people were there and these people were here. But like, I wonder if there's studies that have been done on like, learning about the cultures through resources.
Right.
Right. What types of culture would you expect to find in places with this type of stone? Right. Do they have jadeite there? Well, then you might find this type of culture. Right. Do they have like an excess of conch shell of a certain quality? Like you might find, that type of culture here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was one thing that kind of blew my mind was I got to go into the stacks at the Peabody, which is Harvard's anthropology museum.
They probably have a lot of our stuff there. They definitely have a lot of our stuff. I mean, ours, St Croix stuff.
Oh, totally. Well, they had shit from all over the world. And there was a whole separate wing for lithics and pottery. And we go in there, and there was like the archaic woodland type 2C pots, right? Like this specific area, time period. And there were the pots that when you look in a book, if you look for that type of pot, you'll see that pot. And there were lots of them. But then that same time period dating and that same location, all sorts of different pots.
Yep.
And it really rang my bell. Like as we got to look through the stacks in general, there were like, I remember looking at the water baskets from the Southwest, which were like super tightly woven with, resin on the outside, resin glue on outside and inside. And they were like this tall, but they were all different shapes. And there were the shapes that were like, this is indicative of what they made, but then there was freeform. And it really made me come to terms with the idea that if you're trying to write a paper or make a statement about a group or a time period, then you try and take what's iconic from it. But realistically, the variety that's coming out of that time period is super wide compared to that. And that, like, I wonder how much gets lost in that.
Tons.
A bit, that desire to categorize.
Tons.
And as a survivalist, you don't really give a shit if it matches a cultural
you just want it to work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so it opens things up a little.
That's it.
To be like, what works? It doesn't matter like what was done specifically. It matters what works.
So what goes along with that is like, okay, so here it's like the Saladoid type 1, the Saladoid type 2, the Osteonoid type 1, and all these names that have to do with where it was found. Anyway, as the pottery changed, it's looked at, oh, well, they got more crude. They weren't as good. Well, maybe that's because they were using that for a different purpose. And maybe they're finding some that they think, oh, well, that's osteonoid, that's not saladoid. But maybe that's because they were using that to cook this and using this to prepare, that root or herb. Something that I can't remember where we were at, but we weren't far from here. And we were, my kids would remember it better than I would because they found it. We were digging and like 3 feet in the ground, like, clearly had to be a pre-colonial era pot. It looked like something that the kids made. It was like, whoa, that's a weird piece of pottery. Like, oh, that can't be. That's got to be colonial. It's like, wait a second. Like, look where it was. It can't be that young. It's got to be really old. And we're just like looking at it. It's like, I bet a little kid made this.
Right.
Like, how many pots are just like, are some archaeologists assuming that, oh, it fell in later.
Right.
Somebody dug a hole 200 years later and this fell in.
Right.
And that's why we found it there.
Or all the
like
war
discounting
points.
that. Or are they looking at it and they're like, oh shit, a little kid made this.
Right.
Like, this is children's style osteonoid. It's a really cool little pot.
Right.
A friend / student of ours, she goes to Stanford. She was doing her study on post-colonial era, or I should say colonial era pottery. And she was just like, look at the temper. And I thought that was a really cool way to do it. Instead of look at the form, like look at what is going into it. And
right.
Look at the temper. She's like, if you see this type of temper, then it's got to be colonial, because they never find anything with sand temper in there. All right. They're finding ground up old pots that are in here.
Yeah, it's grog and stuff like that.
Yeah. So that was really cool to like, okay, well, shit, it came from in the ground. All right, well, what if somebody did dig a hole and it did fall in there, and then, well, okay, well, let's look at the temper, and like all those other things lined up. But the one thing that didn't line up was the shape. And a lot of the books, it's like from the 60s and 70s, the first people to come through and write their dissertation on it. And in that book, it's like they're only using the style to say which culture it came from.
Right.
Which is crazy, because like you're saying, so many things had to be falling through the cracks.
Right.
Like you're not going to, yes, there's going to be that one style that's the most indicative of that culture, but that doesn't mean you'll never find something that's different.
Right.
Or, maybe they were trading with somebody who was still making that style pot.
Right.
Just possibilities.
Totally.
I'm not like the expert on pottery styles, but
it always makes me think of napping in the States, where you see the napping get like worse. And it's like, well, yeah, if you had a whole-scale war against an invading culture where you're not trying to make nice points to go hunt deer.
Just kill the guy.
You're just trying to, right, yeah, I'm going to dip this thing in dog shit and fling it at those assholes who keep coming. Like, we're going to nap as many points.
Skippy's dog shit's not going to kill anybody, okay?
Just like, yeah, I have to make 70 of these as fast as possible and Fletch, and I think that's a lot of what the record gets like polluted with compared to hunting points, which
that also kicks
much
a hole
finer.
in that, like we're practitioners, right? We're making the stuff and using it. So I know that in a lot of schools of archaeology, they're like, that's not the right way to do it, is to remake it, right? This isn't for me. This is like a friend who was doing anthropology and archaeology courses, and that's what he was told. No, you can't learn it by making it. You got to learn it by studying it, because if you make it different than they made it, well, then it's different, right? So, but then we have our screw ups where we're making assumptions, because it's like, well, this works, so why wouldn't they do it this way? It's just like you probably have to do a little bit of category, have a little bit of both worlds.
Oh yeah, I mean I think it's a big failure. We're wildly off topic now, but it's still interesting. It's like the amount of archaeologists I've met who have no experience with flint napping and are wildly interested in what I know about it, because they've looked at shitloads of points and they've looked at tons of tools, but they have no firsthand knowledge of it. Whereas like I'm super interested in what they know, because every little hint you can get as to how to get better at napping, you're like, yeah, give me.
That's just like
it's interesting
to typical thing of our modern world, though, where it's like and or.
Right.
Or sorry, either or.
Right.
Whereas if you're looking at it as like a yes and.
Yeah.
Right. You got to learn a little bit of this and you got to learn a little bit of that, and like put the two together.
Yeah.
Which I think, let's go back to topic.
Yeah.
Right. So again, it's like, just because it works for this thing in this place doesn't mean it can't work for that thing.
Right.
In that place.
Right. Well, right. And I think like the concept of acclimatizing or like recognizing that your body takes time to change, to deal with a new environment. I mean, I feel it even in Vermont, the way I feel about 50 degrees in the fall versus 50 degrees in the spring. 50 degrees in the spring, everyone's out in shorts and t-shirts like, woo!
Here, Skippy, I'm taking off your bandana.
Yeah, let's go to the beach. And then, 50 degrees in the fall, everyone's like, oh no, it's coming.
Who goes to the beach in Vermont?
That was the joke. There's no beach in Vermont. There's a gravel bar.
It's a gravel bar. Lake Champlain Beach. Yeah. Don't go in the water. It's fucking freezing.
Yeah.
Versus in the fall, where you're like, it's coming. It's coming.
Yeah, you're like, it's the end for us.
Well, it's like so for us, 50 degrees is like, oh my God, damn on if I can cool them up.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we we're super thankful to get to come down here for as long as we do. But we always kind of count the first week as like you're just dealing with it.
Sweat my ass
Yeah,
off.
just sweat my ass off and like probably get a small sunburn, being like, oh, it's fine, and then be like, it's not fine, and then probably get dehydrated, and
Definitely get covered in bug bites.
probably get a
overreacting
dehydrated cut or an infected cut. I mean, that's something down here that's fucking no joke. Like your cut hygiene here has to be.
You gotta scrub and scrub and scrub and scrub.
Yeah, you can't let it go for 12 hours.
When you look at the books, like the medicinal and edible plant books, so many of them are like antibiotic.
Yeah.
It's like it's a large percentage of that is antibiotic.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, man, that's important.
Well, and that shit can kill you in hours or days. And like it takes a few weeks to starve to death, but I would want to know the plants. First, don't touch those plants. Second, if I cut myself, what plant do I put? Yeah. Which plants do I put on it? And then tell me about the food.
I didn't even think about that aspect of it because when we do hikes here, guided hikes, we're usually talking about uses of plants, and like one of the things I always bring up is that when Europeans came here, they were like coated in wool from head to toe, long sleeve pants,
oh my
right?
God.
Yeah, seriously, like wearing wool. Like,
it sounds horrible.
And then no bathing, right? Victorian era, people did not bathe. Like they'd bathe once a month. I mean, this is you can look it up. Like literally
so
once
nappy.
a month. It's so gross. So they weren't that chaste and actually they weren't not having sex because they're so religious. Because they stank so bad. Like, oh, take it off. Oh,
keep it on.
Put it back on. Put it back on.
We're going to need some rules about this. No one takes anything off.
It's that time of month. No, not that time. Get in the bath.
Yeah, actually, let's get the collars that go all the way up.
Really tight.
You
It's
really
gotta
keep
cinch
it in.
really tight. So anyway, right? There was literally like the perception of like the demons, the bad spirits get in you when you're in the water, right? And so here it was like the opposite, right? People were bathing every day.
Right.
And I never really thought about that. I just always thought about it, they had better hygiene, but it's like maybe you had better hygiene because you damn well better have better hygiene.
Right.
You can't get away with being filthy and swarthy, and like you get that cut and you wash that part off really good and you're good because it's not 5 billion bacteria types to get in there.
Right.
Whereas here, like you better start off clean.
Right.
Right. You gotta scrub all that shit off before you get cut. And it's definitely serious.
Yeah.
You get that little cut, that little injury, and it's like, all right, I'm chilling. Right? Maybe I'm not going to go out hunting today because I got this little scratch on my foot, and I better take care of that scratch on my foot.
Right.
But then again, it's like, where is your? People had different. The more you're exposed to those bacteria, the better your body is at fighting it off.
Right.
So maybe that's not part of it, but that's just something I hadn't thought about. Like maybe that's another part of the reason why it was like you bathe every day.
Right.
Because you might die from that cut if not. So I can imagine that was probably like half of the shaman's job, the medicine man's job.
Oh yeah.
Scrub that foot off really good before
Right.
you go out there again.
Yeah.
Clean it off.
And I bet
real good.
there were cultural like practices around, like you said, basic hygiene, but then like if you do get a cut, how do you maintain it? And then like probably your diet includes things that are bolstering your immune system and like
Yep, internal and external antibiotics and all that.
Right.
Yep, get your bitters in. Yep. Yeah, that's one thing that it's like we were doing this class, but our friends changed jobs and they're doctors and they were doing like a tropical medicine course basically. And it was great for us, but then they're describing all these different tropical diseases like leishmaniasis and all these diseases that we just hadn't come into contact with here. And it's like they're just naming off this one and that one and this one. And I'm like, holy shit!
Yeah,
it's freaking burly. Like it's burly here.
Yeah,
So have that boiling water, ready to go. And that makes me think of like, you used to see it on TV, like the scene where the lady's giving birth in a place that's not the hospital.
Oh man,
it's like towels, hot towel, like wet towels is As a kid, you don't know what that means, but that's just mop up all that blood, right? Keep it clean is basically what that's all about. So that would have been going on back in the day. Make sure you had that clean water that you probably don't drink, that sits in that container, that you replace every 2 or 3 days with clean water. That's a big part of the med kit. This is water.
Right, clean water. Yeah.
Yep, distilled water.
Crazy.
Yep, burley.
Word.
Well, where are we at? Is that it?
Oh, yeah, we're good.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Dang. Well, that was a good conversation.
Yeah.
Did I let the guy in the hat talk enough this time?
Probably not, but it's your landscape.
What?
So, you should have been talking more this time. And next time, hopefully we'll have a guest, and neither of us will be talking as much.
We're going to shut the hell up and let her talk.
Yeah, we'll see.
I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another good
lady.
talk, but there's no lady.
Lady and gentlemen.
The one or two ladies who actually listen to us, dude festing it out. So, gentlemen and lady.
Yeah, there it is. Tropical survival and living.
My son is coming now telling me my cat ate a hummingbird. It's time to cut this conversation off. This conversation is over. So yeah, thanks for listening, for watching, whatever, however you're taking this podcast in. Give us some suggestions on what you want to hear us talk about. We're going to have a guest, maybe the next one or the one after that. My son's showing off his cashew fruits that are looking nice and yummy. Here, toss me one of them suckers. Here, I'm going to go get it. No, it's Jimmy. Okay, throw it to me.
Yeah, and as always, like, subscribe, and tell us if there's any questions you have or things you want us to re-engage about. We definitely will be hitting up tracking again for round 2.
Gotta show off the cashew fruit for all those people who
Oh
don't know
man,
it.
look at that thing.
You don't like that.
I don't like that.
There's a cashew fruit right there. Yummy, delicious. Oh man, it's blurry. Oh yeah, so it's the cashew. That's the fruit, which is actually an engorged stem. It's not actually technically a fruit. The fruit is the highly toxic skin that's covering the cashew nut itself, which has to be heated to make it edible. And then the fruit is delicious, but technically it's an engorged stem. So, anyway, thanks for listening. You don't like that.
Until next time.